this has been confirmed. The minister also said, I must just say to people of South Africa in the media, that whilst indeed there has been a reported number of 2 deaths arising out of COVID-19, what has now been confirmed by the authorities is indeed 1 death, the other death is suspected. The minister will explain all that at an appropriate time, what that means in the medical language. Having said that, we have now colleagues that are here. You will know that yesterday, the President of the Republic, His Excellency, Madam Elastere Ramaphosa, gave orders to our armed forces and security forces to go all over the country and ensure that people of our country are protected and saved from this deadly virus. He made the orders, gave the orders to our police, men and women, gave the orders to our military, our army. We will now be getting from our colleagues on this first day of the lockdown as to how did we do in relation to the orders that were given by our president from all the categories that are in the JCPS cluster, but we have also included, for the purpose of our people at home, the Minister of Transport as well is here, so that we deal with issues of transport, particularly public transport, and the Minister of Trade and Industry is also here, so that we are also able to deal with issues of shops and food outlets, and those shops that were expected to be closed during the lockdown. He will give us an update. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your understanding. Without any further ado, I will start with my colleague, the Minister of Home Affairs. You've just arrived from... all of us have just arrived. Okay, we will then start with the Minister of Defense. Minister of Defense, Sisi Nosiviwe Mapisa Nqakula. Ngathi induku iyakudla sis. If you want to speak from here, you can speak from there. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Minister Tembo. Well, colleagues, after the address by the President, the Commander-in-Chief last night, to the armed forces deployed. You'll recall that initially there was an understanding that our intention is to shut down 3 provinces, which provinces were heavily affected by coronavirus, which was Gauteng, KZN, and the Western Cape. But since last night, we have deployed in all 10 provinces. Now, certain things need to be said as we were meeting as ministers. We are in a campaign which is meant to support the South African Police Service. And this campaign is led by the Department of Health. So what we are doing now, we're talking about a deployment which brings together the metros, the police, and the members of the South African National Defence Force. And I think it's proper that I should upfront submit to the fact that there were some failures which were noted this morning. We received several messages, we received queries from all over the place where people were saying, after seeing, for instance, footage from Alexander, where are the police? Where is the South African National Defence Force? We went to the area as well, made a few interventions, but eventually there was deployment to that area. I do also want to use this opportunity to make an appeal to our people, which is that this pandemic is a killer. The situation we are finding ourselves is a very serious one, because we are fighting, yes, there's deployment, but we are fighting an invisible enemy. And this is what our people need to bear in mind. Right up as we're moving around, monitoring what is happening in Gauteng at least, which is where I've been. People were like, we're still not clear what exactly the issue is here, you know? I think people are trying as much as is possible to practice what is called self-distancing. But it's not enough. We have deployed the next joint plans where the deployments should take place. And based on that, we move in. Of course, I should say this, that in Gauteng is divided in terms of the defense force into two, which is the north sector and the south. So the issues this morning were, but there are areas where you have not deployed. Yes, we had not deployed, or there was still movement to some of the areas. The other matter which was raised with me early this morning which was also raised with the Minister of Police and the Minister of Minister Mthembu, is that of people who started moving yesterday from Gauteng to neighboring provinces. Abandabaye, those who left the Western Cape, moving to the Eastern Cape, those who left Gauteng, moving towards Limpopo, or even to the Braid Bridge crossing into Zimbabwe. We are aware that those people ended up being stranded in the middle of nowhere because they could not cross the Braid Bridge, but also could not come back to Gauteng. But eventually some decisions were taken that people should go back to province where they come from. So you have a group of people which went back to the Western Cape and a group of people which came back to Gauteng. Now, we have, I know the media has been talking about plus minus 3,000 in terms of strength, which is being deployed. But could I also remind the media that that 3,000 is a 3,000, that figure you got it from the letter of employment which was sent to Parliament. And therefore, it may not necessarily be 3,000 at one go. You'll have a rotation. You may have some kind of reinforcement later. But as for today, definitely we have not deployed all 3,000. You have people who are waiting in the bases, waiting for deployment. I'm aware that there are people who have been arrested, but could I also say this, that we are not in law enforcement, we are not enforcers, we don't have the arresting powers. We are enforcers, but we don't have the arrest powers. So I know that I received messages here which were now saying, so how many people have you arrested? The Minister of Police will talk to that. We don't arrest, we simply give support wherever a need arises. I think, Minister Mthembu, that is all. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Minister Maphisa Ngakula. We will now call on the minister whose responsibility is to arrest Minister Bheki Cele to come and speak to the people of South Africa. Baba, yours. No, it's okay. He says that there is some piece of information that they were still gathering for him, so that he has everything that he needs to have before he speaks to the nation. I think that is acceptable. Baba, transport, Fikile Mbalula.
Thank you very much, Minister Mthembu and colleagues. First, to update that in terms of undertaking the order by the President to lock down, when it comes to the Department of Transport in terms of our obligations in implementing the disaster management, we have ensured that last night, midnight, there is a lockdown and transportation in the airspace, air services, in terms of flights, was actually ceased to operate. We did have some operations out of Cape Town and Kinshasa, which was taking people in from Kinshasa, which was about 30 South Africans, and they were then handed over to the authorities in terms of the Department of Health, in terms of Port Health. We also dealt with some cases in Cape Town, and to this end, particularly the German government have also come forward for next week that they want to evacuate, like they did with the sea ship that was there last week, and others to evacuate the German people out of South Africa, who are here in South Africa from next week on Tuesday. And when it comes to public transport, we have had a number of challenges, but the regulations have actually been enforced in terms of public transport. The first challenge in terms of public transport is the challenge of transporting workers with essential needs who are supposed to be at work, those who are working in the banks, those who are working in the supermarkets, those who are working in the hospitals. The operation started well today. At 5 o'clock, we've had challenges of long queues where taxi industry in certain instances did not come to the party to transport people. And we want to emphasize once more that the regulations stand in relation to 5 to 9 transportation for essential workers in the morning. And in the afternoon, 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock, that still stands. You will have seen long queues of people, and that also need to be addressed in terms of expediting the transportation of people. We have had challenges in relation to the application of 50%. That has been clarified to 60% at the present moment when it comes to the capacity of people who must be transported. Because anything over and above that will undermine the reason of the lockdown in terms of social distance. So we appeal once more to taxi owners to understand, because public transport in general, it is shut down. And there is only a provision limited to essential workers. And I know that there have been questions that were raised and there have been issues on the ground in relation to this matter. So, Chief, among those, and in particular in KZN and here in Gauteng that we have had to deal with law enforcement in our space, is the question of ensuring that people get home and at the same time they are transported. And we have been engaging through the MECs in these provinces and also at our level to ensure that the regulations are understood and implemented. Because we can't change regulations on the first day. We've got to evaluate the regulations as to whether do they assist us to achieve the very objective of the lockdown. But any other thing that undermines the objective of the lockdown to ensure that there is social distance as advised by the Minister of Health and to contain this disease and play a part as transport, because transport is responsible for the spread of this particular disease, because we transport people in air, in the sea, on the ground. And the first zero person who was infected came through the airlines in South Africa. So we need to deal with that, and transport is responding to that in the context of the lockdown. So we are addressing all of those challenges. Should the need arise for any change, it will be informed by evidence of saying, does this assist or undermine the lockdown on the ground? So we have dealt with a number of cases and incidents that I will not deal with. A number of incidents in which people will have faced challenges in terms of transport, especially essential services. We are happy when it comes to railway. Railway was shut down today throughout the country. Trains are not moving. We are happy as of last night. So the numbers have actually come down. My last point, and others we can respond, is to highlight the fact that we have increased operations when it comes to law enforcement, in particular traffic in the N1, particularly to Limpopo, when it comes to those who are undermining the lockdown, because distance travel, when it comes to distant taxi travel and all of that, is not allowed. And when it comes to freight and cargo, only freight and cargo is allowed to go and cross the borders to Zimbabwe. Now, what we have seen, which is what Minister Mtswaledi will speak about, is that we have seen on the ground people traveling to Zimbabwe in numbers, Libombo and everywhere else, undermining the lockdown in relation to travel, and in particular freight and cargo, meaning cargo or anything of that sort that is not about the lockdown and the regulations we have actually issued is actually crossing the border long after 12 o'clock as declared by the president. So this particular roadblock is focused on that, because everybody, according to the lockdown, must stay where they are. And we must address the numbers in relation to the queues in the morning and in the afternoon. And we've spoken to the taxis, the minibus taxis, to come to the party and transport people quite frequently to and from work in the limited times we have actually talked about in terms of the regulations and the directions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Before I call Minister Ndosi, let me allow Minister of Defense and Military Veterans to say something that was left in the update that she gave.
Thank you very much, Minister Mthembu. Colleagues, I just feel that I should set the record straight on the Meta uniform, which was worn by the President last night. President is Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. And as Commander-in-Chief, nothing wrong with him wearing uniform of the South African National Defence Force. Secondly, the law in South Africa says there's only one uniform for the armed forces, and that uniform is that of the South African National Defence Force. And therefore, that is why we've been discouraging a number of people from using any other uniform in their events, because the only uniform really which is allowed in South Africa is that which belongs to the South African National Defence Force. And the uniform the President was wearing yesterday is the uniform of the South African National Defence Force, no other. If he had been wearing a uniform here, MK, which is part of the ex-combatants uniform of the ANC, it would have been completely out of order, and he too would not have even addressed the soldiers. The third matter, which I need to say this, once you wear uniform, and in that uniform, now in terms of the South African National Defence Force, there are ranks which are reflected on the uniform. You are immediately submitting yourself to the command of the Chief of the South African National Defence Force. Now, the uniform which was worn by the President had no ranks on it. And lastly, I should say this, the uniform the President was wearing is camouflage. It's an overall. That uniform is worn when you know that you are going to work. So I think it's important for me to set the record straight, because this has been, the social media has been a buzz. Some people are welcoming it. Some people seem to have a problem. There is absolutely nothing wrong with what happened last night. After all, he is the Commander-in-Chief of the South African National Defence Force. And lastly, as I said, if on that uniform there was any rank reflected, as you would know, right, whether a colonel or, then it would have meant that the Commander-in-Chief is now being submitted to the command of General Shock. It wasn't like that. He wore a cap, he wore a camouflage, which is a uniform yomsebenzi to identify with the South African National Defence Force members who were out on deployment last night. I just thought I should clarify that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. We now call on Ndosi, Minister of Police. He told me that he is now ready. Ndosi.
Thank you, Mvelas. Good evening to you. Good evening to my colleagues, all ministers that are here, the media. Last night was the day, 12 o'clock, as the lockdown has been called, almost announced by the President, three and a half days before that. Some of us will spend time with the ground forces that were implementing and enforcing that law. One was lucky to visit 4 roadblocks, the main one being the N1 going to Limpopo. After 12, all cars were not allowed to pass going to Limpopo on the road N1, and they were turned back. The other roadblock was N4 going to northwest. There was one this side from Gauteng and the other one from northwest under Brigadier Mans, and the Gauteng one under Brigadier Dladla. And the other one was in N3 going to KZN. But we also visited the areas where the police have saturated, like Soshanguve. We went there. We left Soshanguve at 3:20 in the morning. Altogether, there were 172 roadblocks in the country, with little bit less than 24,000 deployed men and women. Not all in blue this time, but mostly in blue, with the metros and other enforcers. We had a good night. We had a success. Many South Africans, a big number of South Africans, had a very good will. Our phones were abuzz with the reports and things that we're seeing there and telling us that we need to stop those things. As a result, working with the many good citizens of the land, people that were breaking the law, the very regulations, the liquor laws, last night, 55 of them were arrested. 2. Free State were arrested 5. Gauteng were arrested 20. 6 of them from Alex and 14 from the rest of Gauteng. KZN were arrested 7 from the suburb called Montle. Limpopo were arrested 10. Northwest were arrested 11. And Western Cape were arrested 2. These people are people that don't have a good will. Are people that are doing exactly what they were told not to do. Some of them were opening their street bash. Some of them were drinking, taking their bush chairs, sitting under the trees, and undermining the law. But more than that, undermining the life of the people of the Republic of South Africa and their own lives. You must remember that what is happening here is not the war against any citizen of the Republic of South Africa. It's against the war, as the President has said, against this enemy called coronavirus. But whoever is breaking the law, whoever is not working with South Africans, which means is joining the enemy against the people of South Africa. And we are there to make sure that we defend the people of South Africa, including those people that breaking the law themselves. We are defending them here. So we will continue to do this. We know that even this morning, people were still giving us good information, except one information that was not very good. They told me that people having a party in one ship-in called Short Left in Soshanguve. Unfortunately for that person who gave me that information, that was the last ship-in I visited at 3:20. So I knew that it was locked and there was nothing there. So we love this information, but please don't give us fake news, because we might be in a better understanding of that particular thing more than you, because we move around to see these things. Later on, we were joined by the members of the National Defence Force, South African National Defence Force. You will remember that they took longer when the president addressed them in their base, and they had to move from their base to come and join us. Yes, indeed, they did. Late last night or early hours, especially around Pretoria, and then we worked with them. There were a few issues that were raised. Those issues, one of them was Alexandra. But generally, having done that and the forces having done very well, there were shortcomings. One of the main shortcomings is an issue of shopping or making groceries. We have had that discussion with the Minister of DTI, Economic Development, and indeed, we are finding an answer that soon we'll know how to handle that area. Indeed, there is a shortcoming coming to the very long queues, spending there for a long time and not observing at all the social distance. And sometimes we have discovered, we were fully briefed, that sometimes people that join those queues are not even there to make the shopping, they are there for outing. So, it's because they don't have other activities around this, so they go there for outing. So we're sifting all those things, and we're going to be very tough with those people, and we are urging the people to stay put for next 21 days, which will really help to save all of us. I want to end up by, again, thanking the people, good citizens of the Republic of South Africa. I've got a long list of reports where people are reporting that this is happening there, this is happening there, this is happening there. I've promised those people that we're going to be responding quickly and fast to all those people that are messing up the goodwill and the good work that South Africans are doing. It's about the life and death of the people of South Africa. Now we know, at least, that this thing kills. One more thing about it killing, it blows the theory that it kills old people. So you might be youth and think that it can't do anything. I don't think that you might be much youth than 28 years. So it's a call for everybody, it's a call for the nation to say, if you thought it goes for 60s, 70s, 80s, no. The first victim of it is 28 years. So let's be serious about it. Let's be safe about it. Calling the South Africans to be part and make partnership with the government, make partnership with the nation to defeat this scourge. But one last point. If you don't join us, if you don't walk with us, we'll pull you to walk with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Bheki Cele. We will now call upon the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition to come and speak to us. Minister Patel.
Thank you very much, colleague. Today, as we all know, is been day one of an unprecedented event in South Africa, the start of the first ever lockdown. There are four key things that we've seen today. The first is the seriousness of the challenge with a significant rise in the infection rate, with more than 1,000 people now positive, and our first death. The second is we've seen enormously high levels of cooperation by tens of millions of South Africans who have followed the call by the President to stay at home. We have seen major cities that have been empty. We've seen office blocks that have been deserted, and we'd like to thank fellow South Africans for that. The third thing is that we've seen evidence of the state putting mechanisms in place across the country, the police, the army, but also critical public essential services that have been mobilized at very, very short notice. Finally, we've seen some challenges and glitches, as one would expect from this major and massive mobilization of resources across the nation, and we'll be addressing these as we refine our approach and as we implement the lockdown over the remaining period. On the economy as a whole, most of the economy shut down today, with the exception of essential services. And while we had reports of some companies which stayed open, who were not essential services, these were relatively small exceptions. Most companies in those sectors of the economy that are not essential services obeyed the call of the President. Workers, employers stood together in enabling people to stay at home. Food production kept going over this period. The production line was working today. We had workers in farms, in food factories, in the trucks that bring the food from the factory to the shops, and retailers were generally open and were beginning to restock many of their shelves after the big rush to the shops that had taken place yesterday. For retail stores as a whole, we've seen a large number of shoppers, both yesterday and today, in many parts of the country. Today was the first day that many monthly paid workers were able to go and shop after they were paid on the 25th of the month. I spoke with retailers this afternoon to see what the experience was and to identify ways in which we can manage the process with as little movement of people across cities and in suburbs. We must shorten the queues outside the retail stores. We must decrease the number of people in stores to prevent the spread of the virus. So we're having a conversation now with the retail sector, with the police, and in the command center to see what are sensible ways in which we can enable people to get the basic foods and the basic goods that they need, but also avoid large congregations that can spread the virus. Retailers are restocking their shelves in the next 2 days to ensure that those who need to shop next week have basic and essential goods available. And I'd like to thank the workers in the factories, the truck drivers that are bringing food to the retail stores so that South Africans know that they have access to food. Over the next 3 weeks, grocery stores and spaza shops will be the one place where South Africans need to go for basic and essential goods. And so we're going to call on our people to have patience as we introduce the necessary measures to ensure social distance is maintained, is enhanced, that we can all the time, everything we do is to use the 3 weeks period to limit the spread of the virus. On additional regulations, last night, new regulations were approved which specified essential goods and services. We've updated the basic goods list. It's now in the Government Gazette. For example, Minister Dlamini Zuma has gazetted that products of care for babies and toddlers are now clearly in the list of essential goods, as are personal toiletries like face wash, roll-ons, toothpaste, and so on. The essential services list has also been updated to include tow trucks and vehicle recovery services, those call centers that are necessary to provide health, safety, social support, government and financial services, the harvesting and storage activities that are essential to prevent spoilage and wastage of primary agricultural goods, the small number of people who have to work in the payroll departments of a company to ensure that workers get their wages, those who are paid on a weekly basis and those who are paid before the end of the lockdown period. And it's only that small number of people who run the payroll that will be an essential service. And critical maintenance services, which can't be delayed for more than 21 days, where you have these large establishments that have to ensure an orderly shutdown. Those core maintenance services will be permitted. We've also provided clarification in a number of areas, including the National Institute of Communicable Diseases, medical scheme administration, and vital demand services for the energy grid. But we're keeping the areas as focused, as narrow as possible, so that most South Africans can stay at home in responding to the appeal of the President. We now have 5 broad product areas which cover the basic goods which our people will need in this period, and they are set out in 33 essential service areas. We'll make this clearly available to the public through government communication platforms and through the media. We'd like to thank businesses and consumers for working with us during this time. It is a disruption to our life. We're not going to be able to fight the virus if we can continue with all the things that we do every day. So it's disruption, but it's disruption to try to disrupt the spread of the virus, to ensure that, in fact, South Africans remain safe. We introduced from yesterday a facility through the CIPC website that companies can register to indicate that there are essential services, so that we create a national list of essential services. By 5 o'clock this afternoon, 50,000 companies have registered their businesses as providers of essential services and goods through the lockdown period. They employ 1.5 million workers who are working to make sure that the nation has food, cleaning materials, medical products, other necessities, and transport. We'll update these from time to time. I'd like to thank the Companies and Intellectual Properties Commission for doing a great job. They have, at very short notice, put together this website, and they're refining it, strengthening it, and sorting out the kinks in the system. Certificates have been issued to 40,000 businesses. The rest will be emailed shortly. And I want to indicate that healthcare professionals who are registered with the Health Professional Council do not need to register through this website. Neither do sole proprietors, small businesses like your spaza shops and so on. But we are beginning to develop a single database of the key companies that would need to be kept open to ensure that our people have what is needed. On the medical supply chain, Minister Mkhize, who is not with us today, has done great work over the last few days in putting the Department of Health and the public sector together. We're creating a common database where we can see the stocks of key medical supplies that will be needed over this period, and to ensure that where there are critical areas, that we ramp up production. On export controls, we have to ensure that there are adequate supply of key pharmaceutical and medical supplies so that we can prevent and treat those who are ill during this next period. To ensure that we are able to meet the demands of our people, I have today signed off on a set of regulations which will control the export of key goods, including things like face masks, hand sanitizer, and critical medications. It's not an export ban, but we will be controlling the level of exports to ensure that we have a sufficient supply within our borders, and companies wishing to export these items must submit applications to the International Trade Administration Commission, who will then consult with the relevant government departments before issuing permits for export. We've also worked with the Department of Tourism and the Department of Health to enable hotels to make their facilities available for quarantine sites, and we've signed off on a set of exemptions to the Competition Act to enable coordination between hotels and government departments, both on quantities of beds that will be made available and pricing of these beds. Finally, on excessive pricing, we have seen examples of people seeking to exploit the high demand for certain goods by hiking their prices. The Competition Commission and the Consumer Commission have received just over 500 complaints of excessive pricing or unjustified price increases. These are now being acted on, and the full might of the law will be used against companies concerned. We will not hesitate to charge people criminally under the legislation, and they will be put in jail if they are found guilty. Companies will be given fines that may put many of those businesses in closure. They will basically have to close their business because it is necessary for us to protect South Africans from not being exploited in this period. So we make a call on every supplier of goods in this period: don't hike up your prices, don't charge excessive prices. We're in this crisis together, and we have to manage this crisis till we get to the other end. And so it cannot be business as usual, and it certainly can't be a situation where some will seek to score advantage at the expense of our people. So the overall story is that our key supply chains are working, and that we have had tremendous support from our people as workers, as consumers, as truck drivers, as business people, and we'd like to appreciate that. We recognize some of the challenges. We're working on these, and many of these will be resolved in the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Patel. The next speaker is now Minister Aaron Motsoaledi, Minister of Home Affairs.
Thank you very much, Minister. In Home Affairs, our biggest worry was the borders, especially Musina, which was in the news throughout the whole day, because it's true there were problems there. We want to accede to that. It looks like the issue of panic buying did not only happen to ordinary citizens, it was also happening to companies. From what I observed, there was panic exporting, because I've never in my life seen so many trucks. The congestion of trucks in Musina was extending right from the Zimbabwean side, across the bridge, extending 7 to 10 kilometers back into South Africa. What was more disturbing was the number of trucks on the bridge itself, trying to get onto the Zimbabwean side. We had to have an urgent meeting with the Zimbabwean side to find mechanism to relieve that congestion of trucks. It was not only, the reason that I thought is panic, it was not only food and essentials, it was everything that needs to be exported, because we said trade among the countries will continue. But I think many companies did not believe that. They believe 12 o'clock is the last time that they'll ever be able to export goods, and I think that's why they responded the manner in which they did. The second problem were people. I must state, people arrived at the Beit Bridge border post from South Africa long before 12 o'clock. But the problem which started, which was not foreseen, was that it looks like Zambia also had a deadline for their borders, and theirs was 8 o'clock. Between them and their neighbors, it was 8 o'clock. So the Zimbabwean side feared that if they allowed people, because there were a lot of Zambians, a lot of Malawians, even Mozambicans, so people were crossing Beit Bridge were not going to one country. They were going to the rest of the continent. And the fear in Zimbabwe was that if they allow them in, they may not be able to find a way out of Zimbabwe, and they'll become their problem. So that's why they could not allow them until we had to have a meeting again with the Zimbabwean counterparts, and they had to phone the Zambian counterparts to negotiate that we must allow the chain to move through so that everybody can go home. And because if they got stuck in South Africa, many of them were going to Musina, which is a very tiny town, and I think it was going to be overwhelmed. But when we left the bridge, the flow had started, and we think within a few hours it will have been cleared. The other border posts, we managed to talk to the managers there by phone. There was a little bit of hiccup with Oshoek, with Swaziland, and Limbombo with Mozambique, but all those problems were solved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sisi. We will now have, thank you, Minister Mswaledi. We will now have the Minister of Justice and Correctionals. You don't want to speak? Okay, you'll take questions. Thank you very much. Sis Nkosazana, if there's one or two words you want to say after the questions, okay. You realize, colleagues, that in the main, the colleagues that we wanted to speak to us are the ones that were responsible for the soldiers and the police that were deployed by the president, and also the colleague who's responsible for the border management, and also the colleague who's responsible for transport, of course, and also the colleague responsible for the places where we buy food and where also we needed to shut down some economic activity. So those colleagues have now spoken. We will now take questions from yourselves, so that, and again, as we take questions, colleagues have said, we are on day one, and as everything else, on any day one of a start of any campaign, there might be some difficulties, and colleagues have spoken to those difficulties, they've been open to those difficulties. But having said that, let's take the hands, Sisi, Mfo, the gentleman that side, the lady, the two ladies. That will be our first round. Are there any people in Cape Town that we should be giving an opportunity? Oh, we're not in Cape Town. Oh, thank you very much. We can start, colleague. We want to hear you.
Good evening. All right. Criselda Lewis from SABC Television News. My first question is to Minister Patel. Minister, at what point do you become tougher with the retailers? I know that it is day one, but it seems that most of the challenges that were had in terms of social distancing in areas identified as problematic pertained to retailers, and perhaps retailers themselves, again, not playing their part in terms of ensuring that there is between those who are coming to buy at those particular retailers. Given the fact that you are ministers responsible for the ensuring that there's no further spread of the coronavirus in South Africa, heard of news that ACDP leader Kenneth Mishwe has tested positive for the coronavirus. We know the issue relating to how contact with the president at a meeting that they had had. Would you suggest that the president perhaps go for retesting, given that he already has, and we only get the results of the ACDP leader now? And thank you.
Okay, next.
Good evening. I have two questions quickly. Minister of Police, General Cele. My name is Aser from Capital Life, by the way. Can you maybe give us an indication, where do you keep these people that are arrested during this period? Then question number two, I just want to ask, there is a problem in townships. Seeing long queues, especially in complexes, shopping malls, because most shops are closed. Is it true that the announcement that foreign shops must close? Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Name is
Just a minute. Can we have a better mic? That mic seems to be on and off.
Ms. Bula from ET. Minister, there seems to be a culture of arrogance and ignorance by most residents who we spoke to today, saying that if they don't find whatever basic essential needs, such as bread, meat, whatever it could be, they will be lining up again and going to the shops. And they don't care if this virus actually is out there and is deadly. Could we be seeing harsher restrictions in terms of increasing the numbers of law enforcement authorities on the streets to actually keep people away from such behavior? And then two as well, the homeless people are actually saying that they don't know anything in terms of communication and what's going on. In fact, they claim that when they go to some of these suggested houses where they can find safety and get better food, they're being chased away and turned away. What's going to happen in terms of that problem that we have right there? Because they're quite vulnerable and they're in the streets knowing nothing. Thank you.
I want us to deal with your last question. We will have colleagues tomorrow that will be from the social cluster, who will be able to answer that question, if you don't mind. Because these colleagues from the JCPS might not be having the necessary detail in answering that question of our people who live in the streets. Thank you very much. Next.
Thank you so much. Sidi Madia from News 24. Two quick questions. I think both the Transport Minister and the Police Minister spoke about the N1 highway. Can I ask about the alternative routes? You know, a lot of people saying, but if they're on the N1, what happens to the R101? If they are looking at the N4, what about Tabazimbi? Are you also deploying forces on the alternative routes? Because if you turn people around, they just go to another one to still get out of particular provinces. Secondly, it's linked to what my colleague Criselda asked. Reverend Kenneth Meshwe testing positive. He wasn't just next to the president, he was also next to the deputy president. Has Deputy President Mabuza been tested? Is he okay? Is he in self-isolation? Thanks.
Was that the last question? Thank you. Oh, there.
Thank you. Al-Nashid, Spotlight News. Minister Patel, just on a particular point, you spoke around equipment, and previously you've spoken briefly on ventilators. Could you speak a little bit more, give us more details about what's happening in the sector in case there is a shortage? Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Hi, good evening. Isabel from Network 24. My question is for Minister Cele. We received some photos, videos, especially from the Cape, about the police being a bit more enforcing than normal. If you can just comment on that. We don't know if it's fake news or what's happening
there. I don't know whether he has heard you, but can you repeat yourself if you don't mind, please?
Is it better now? Okay.
Yeah.
My question was regarding to the police and also the armed forces using more force than necessary to arrest people or get them off the streets. We received videos of people being hit or kicked even. So I just wanted to find out what is happening there.
Okay. I hope we have been heard. Next.
Good evening, colleagues. My name is Morris Msiza. I'm from Soshanguve Community Radio. My question actually goes to the Minister of Police and Mr. Patel. We have, in Soshanguve today, we experienced a number of people queuing in malls, and that was a bit, frustrating for us. And there's other videos that we have seen in Hammanskraal. I don't know if the minister has seen, where people are in a party giving false information that they don't care about this thing and so forth. Is there anything that the minister intends to do for such people? And to Mr. Patel, how do we then address the issue of the people that are queuing up in malls? Because if we allow then people to say, okay, we can have more than 200 people queuing up in malls, like the situation that was happening at Soshanguve Crossing today, self-isolation is not considered. So why do we then have a lockdown if we will allow people to queue like that? Can I please get an answer on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, who wants to start? Okay. Patel?
Thank you very much. There's been a few questions, so I'm going to try to group the questions that were asked. The first question relates to what happened at retailers today. Questions asked by a number of the media houses. So I think I want to reinforce the message that we gave earlier, that today was the first day of the lockdown. We've looked very carefully at the experience. We've listened to consumers, to the police. We've had valuable feedback from Minister Cele and the police. We've spoken to all the major retailers. We've had feedback from small spaza shops. And we will now be refining the measures in place to ensure greater social distance inside the supermarkets, but critically outside the supermarkets too. There are a number of measures being looked at. For example, in some of the retailers, they will now be providing trolleys to those in the queue so that there is at least a distance between people constituted by the trolley. We will be refining with Minister Cele and the Command Council additional measures to enable us to have fewer people in the queues and gathering in places where, in fact, the virus can spread. We have to do things to ensure that we limit the spread of the virus. We don't want to introduce measures only when very large numbers of people have died. These measures are to enable us to reduce the spread of the virus and to reduce the number of South Africans and residents who are in South Africa from dying. So these are now being evaluated, and as soon as we've made these decisions, we'll make the announcements. Already today, we've had a discussion, as I've indicated, with the major retailers. They are absolutely aware of government's concerns on these, and as I say, we will be taking the necessary action. The second question that came up is on spaza shops. The regulations specifically enable spaza shops to sell essential goods, only the essential goods in the regulations. Spaza shops also have to ensure social distance. They're tiny little shops, and so you can't have numbers of people gathering there. So those owners also have to take steps to ensure social distance. The spaza shop regulations apply to all spaza shops, irrespective of who owns the spaza shops. So spaza shops can remain open, provided they only sell the goods on the essential goods list that has been gazetted. The question came up about misunderstandings of what the regulations are, people being ignorant of the regulations, and people not taking it seriously enough. I want to underline an important message that has come from the President, come from the Minister of Health, come from the Minister of Kokta, and come from Minister Mthembu. We're in an absolutely serious crisis that we have to contain. And so all of us have to work together to get the message out. Yes, government has an important role to speed up the communication, to use even more platforms to reach our people. So too have the media, is to get the basic message across. We cannot afford to have a debate about the smaller issues and lose the basic message that we have to stay at home. We have to take measures to ensure that there's food supplies to South Africans and to everybody who live in the country. That's absolutely essential, that we use our combined power as government, as the media, and the many people on social media also, ordinary residents and citizens who must spread the message and show that those countries that were too flexible, that were too easy, are now paying a massive price with huge numbers of people dying in those countries. The next question that came up was the big queues in the malls. I've covered the shopping, the supermarkets and so on. We've taken into account that today was the first day that many people who are paid on a monthly basis could go to the shops. But even so, even though next week we're going to have a large number of people who will get social grants, it is vital that we have controls in place to limit the spread of this virus. And so we're going to be working hard to ensure that those measures are in place, that people are able to access food, but that it's not large crowds that are there at any given point. I've also been asked a question on medical equipment, making sure that medical equipment is available, and there's a number of things that we are doing now. I indicated that there are key products that we will no longer allow for export without a particular license. This will make sure that we have significant South African stocks available, that we also make stocks available to neighboring countries. We're in this together. We need to make sure that we all come out on the other side together. But there are other things that we're doing. As I indicated, we're working on a prototype of a ventilator that can be built here. We're using the technology that previously have been used to build cars and to build components for vehicles. These are now being repurposed to see if we can get this basic ventilator in production as quickly as possible. We're fast-tracking imports wherever we can find ventilators. I'm using that as an example. We will make sure that the clearance at the ports of entry are facilitated and fast-tracked so that the hospitals and the National Department of Health and provinces have the equipment, that they don't sit stuck in the ports themselves. We are working with clinicians to ensure that all the work we're doing is consistent with the basic healthcare protocols. And we're also ensuring that we use all of our facilities more efficiently. Before the national state of disaster was declared, every hospital could only use its ventilators for its own patients. Some hospitals had a higher supply of ventilators. Others had very little. Through an amendment to or an exemption that we've granted in the Competition Act, hospitals are now allowed to share all of these kind of facilities between themselves and to share patients, to share nurses, to share the kind of skilled technicians and medical personnel that operate the various equipment. Ventilators is one clear example, but there are others also. So these are all measures we're taking to ensure that we use what we have as effectively as possible, that we build more of what we need, we produce more of what we need, and we import as much as we can find elsewhere in the world. And so obviously, under difficult circumstances, we have to use every tool that's in the legal toolkit to ensure that we bring the necessary medical equipment to be available to our people. I think those covers the questions that have been asked from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We now call on Bucks Minister Mbalula.
Well, there is one question, and I think everybody is happy with what we explained, which is that the big challenge on the ground currently on the first day is transport in relation to the regulations. And I've explained that, echoing the view of my colleagues and South Africans of goodwill, in majority, who say that we all have got to obey and follow the regulations. It is a big challenge for the taxi industry to ferry 60% people, but it is also a big challenge already in terms of the lockdown, because it affects taxi industry heavily in terms of their own profits and so on. And that is why in our presentation we have addressed the situation of how we are going to intervene. And I want to salute the taxi industry leadership for acknowledging this and coming to the party, understanding that this is our cause as South Africans and the world over, to converge and work together in pushing back the scourge of this virus. So I know the complaints, they are there, about the fact that we are hard hit if the numbers are going down per taxi or minibus, but we insist on these regulations because social distance must be realized in a minibus taxi and also in a bus if it is taking people to work. That must happen. Unfortunately, we've got to work within those confines. The culture of arrogance and the culture of ignorance, I don't think it is ignorance when somebody posts on social media and boasts to thinking that is challenging the state. This is not a state issue. It's a question of humanity being attacked by a virus, which need us as a people to unite. Now, we can't allow a coterie of few people to outweigh the majority who embrace goodwill. Even where police have acted with the strictest, stamping the authority and the soldiers, South Africans have embraced those actions because they say, no, this cannot go on. We know that people have been saying in the townships, these queues cannot go on. But we need to understand that it is not just the law, but it is equally the people themselves acknowledging the fact that we are in this together. It's not like President Ramaphosa decided on a state of emergency. We're in 1986, and Peggy Cele is Adrian Flock. No. We are in a democracy, and therefore in a democracy we are faced with a big challenge that here is a virus, and how do we fight it? It is a pity that you can have people in an era of peace who think that they want to take up arms and fight the state. There is no time for fighting. It is time to work for goodwill and win this together. And we know that this virus, we are told by our own people, health and the Minister of Health, we can only win it by social distance. We can only win it by not gathering en masse. Who would have known that in South Africa today, in the next coming days, will not go in for Easter and all of that? We have accepted that. It's painful, but humanity have said, let us converge and work together and fight. The operational plan in terms of alternative routes obviously those will have to be found. I mean, those who use alternative routes, the traffic and working with the police and everybody will deal with that. And to ensure that we push back the numbers. And those who want to undermine the rules and still go long distance and do all sorts of things and block, bait, breach and so on, we'll have to push them back. They must stay where they are. And that is what needs to be done. And I want to pause there and say that there are challenges in day one in terms of transport, but there is goodwill in the sense that the majority of taxi people have come to the party, and we still want to make a call to them, Minister Mthembu and colleagues, that please transport people between 5 a.m. and 5 a.m. up to 9 a.m. The question has been asked to me and Minister Mthembu by everybody, including in social media and everywhere. What happens with people between 9 a.m. and 4 o'clock who would have used minibus taxis to go for grocery and all of that? We want to discourage people for using taxis to go a distance to get grocery. Can I repeat that again? We want to discourage people from getting into a minibus taxi at 9 a.m. to go to town a distance to get grocery, to go back home. We are encouraging in this time, let's get whatever that we can get, which is food, in our neighborhood, where we can walk a distance and do that. Where we have to get into a taxi, it should be under exceptional circumstances. That I stay in Zingi, and therefore there is nothing in Zingi. I then have to use a taxi to get something in Mukupani. Then in that instance, that is acceptable. But if I stay in my vicinity, there is a spaza shop, there is a supermarket, don't move and go to Zingi and find what you want. You will get it after 21 days, where we will have, some freedom to move. It does not mean we will have won, but we want to contain this. We are discouraging people from doing that. That is why we are giving transport in the regulations limited time to only ferry workers for essential services. Now, we can't review that now. If we were to review that, like Minister Patel says, it means on Sunday when the Command Council meet, we'll have to examine, is this arrangement that we have introduced as transport constraining our people? Is it helping the containment, or can we review it? At the present moment, in day one, we can't, because we are not in a state of emergency and apartheid. This is above board. We don't want people to travel and to gather en masse. Get what you want, milk, bread, where you are. Akosia Inyova, there is no go area here where it will be said that you cannot bring in food into the township, you cannot bring a bakery into the township. All of those deliveries are happening. So you can get milk, you can get eggs, you can get whatever you want. So our luxuries, we reserve them for later. So I'm just addressing this point because it is a huge issue for those who are commuting with taxis and who are using taxis to get shopping and all of that for food and groceries. They've been asking that question, and my answer to them is that limit the movement. Stay where you are, and then don't go far away to get what you can actually get in your neighborhood, what you can get in a spaza shop. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Kadzingi, Minister Mbalo.
Thank you. Minister Nosive Mapisa Ngagula. No question for you, okay. Minister Peggy, Kyle.
Thanks, Madam Timbu. Where are the people that you have arrested? We have kept them or we keep others. I did give the numbers, which provinces are they arrested. Every province in this country has got a police cell. So they're in the police cell, except one that is in the correctional service center. But the rest are in the different provinces, in different cells. What we try to do is to do what we're supposed to do. Sanitize them, give them the stuff that is supposed for you, and other stuff that they don't begin to spread the disease if they have. As a South African police, we have ordered quite a big number of this temperature thing is coming, but for now we work with health where we can't provide to help us on that. So they're on the different provinces. They're there. I'm sure you're not asking the question because you want to see them. It is on the regulations that we can't visit our cells at the present moment. They are restricted. Nobody can visit. If you want to send them a half brown, wait, the time will come. So there is a question. I don't think I understood it very well. Do you want them to use more force? Were you saying one police, are you asking me if I want police to use more force, or are you saying under prevailing circumstances, are they using more force? Or you believe they are using the more force? Wait until you see the more force. They are not. They are really being very kind. Even these 55 people will tell you that they were arrested under normal arrest conditions and all that. Here, maybe with the question from Soshanguve, I've got 33 incidents that were reported last night of this form of people that are misbehaving. Let me tell you one thing. South Africans are very irritated by those people, are very irritated by these misbehaving people. Otherwise, they would not be phoning us the rest of the night, first thing in the morning, that so-and-so, they report about Mawoti, they report about Tembisa, they report about all this. We do have the list of those places. And I can promise them, it won't be without returns. Those people that are reported and continue to do that, break the law, it won't be without returns. We are not going to undermine the goodwill of the people of South Africa that give the information, and we don't act on that information. We'll act within the law, but we'll have to be decisive. Decisiveness is measured and measurable. One question that was asked, did these people use bypass of our roadblocks? Gauteng is the most difficult of these provinces to roadblock. It's got too many ends. Is your N1, is your N3, is your N4, is your N8, is your N14, around there, some ends and ends and ends. Maybe that's why in Gauteng alone, we had 23 roadblocks last night. Gauteng alone, we had 23 roadblocks, including the parallel roads. Most of the N are paralleled by the old roads. Your R101, your R102, your R103. So all those parallel roads that if it is not N1 is parallel R101, they were all taken care of yesterday. Hence we had 23. It didn't matter which direction you took. If that road, either primary road or secondary road, was leading out of Gauteng, we were there. And then we make sure that we took care of those people that they thought they would bypass us. I want to repeat that there were 172 of these roadblocks in the country. Durban is easy. there are just two ends. Is your N3, your N2, you seal Durban, your M4 South, your M4 North, your M27 Chatsworth, yes, other M25 Kwamashu, Durban is sealed, so it's fine. So there you need about 5 to 7 to seal Durban. But in Durban 2, we had 22 roadblocks. Cape Town 2 is easy. It's got N1, it's got N2, it's got M7 going to Namibia. So you seal those, you are done with some few M's. So nobody yesterday could have moving during the time could not meet any form of roadblock in the Republic of South Africa, especially these 3 big centers. And we will be increasing on that. We will be making sure that all the time we are there until the 21 days are over. I want to reiterate, Soshanguve, to say we saw that and we were told it was not only Soshanguve with this long list. I think the worst of them, by the way, was not Alex. I think it was Lenasia at Boxer Shop. I think that was the worst one. So we are monitoring them. We are working on them. That will have to change. Andren Flock, I think, led my torture. Is one man that tortured me worst. Under him, I was worst tortured, and I would not love to be like him. Thank you.
Minister Mzwaledi, was there a question for you? There was no question. Okay. It looks like we have concluded the question, unless if there are, we can give you another round, but that will be the last round. Vuya, the lady and the gentleman, and the gentleman and the lady. Thank you very much, Vuya. We sanitize it. Yes. Oh, okay. Now we'll answer them. Continue.
To the Minister of Defense and the police, have you received any reports of unbecoming behavior from the part of some of your members? Also, some South Africans complain that some of them aren't wearing masks and sanitizer. And are you aware of them? Do you know, if so, do you know if they have any passengers on board?
Thank you. Next.
Antoinette Slaubert from Rapport. Minister Mtem, I know the Minister of Health is not here tonight, but surely as a command council you must have been briefed. Can you give us an understanding of the profile of the people who are infected at the moment? What it was at the beginning, how it has changed, and how you expect it to change going forward?
Okay. Next.
All right, thank you. My name is Belana Pakhadi. I'm from Newsroom Africa. I just wanted to check here, as far as communications is concerned, we've seen a number of people here going into I'd say the rurals or other provinces from Gauteng. Are local government officials and councillors as well being engaged as to assist as far as communications concerned about this particular virus, so that people will be able to stay indoors? You'd know that in villages, people love to gather in their numbers. So if people have gone home in so much of their numbers, perhaps they'd want to also gather. Those are some of the places. My assumption is that you'd want to go and check with. And the second one would be the companies forcing people to go to work, and also hearing claims that some of the companies also released letters saying that if people don't come to work, then they will be fired come the end of the 21-day lockdown. Are you concerned, Minister Patel, that that these kind of companies, when you realize, if such of cases are brought to your attention, that it would not really mean going to consult a lot, but you'd need to deal decisively so that people are able to know that I still have a job come the end of the 21-day cycle? Thank you.
Yes, well.
Minister Crisaldo from SABC Television News once again. Just some clarity on the two people who died. I know that there's an issue with one of the individuals. Could you confirm at all at this stage if one of the two women that died is confirmed not to have had COVID-19? And the second issue, do you know anything about an incident in Kenya where it's believed or alleged that a South African committed suicide after finding out that they may have contracted the virus? Thank you.
Yes, well.
Good day, everyone. My name is Johnny Sai. I'm with African News Agency in Pretoria. My first question for Minister Lamola, please. Sir, could you give us an insight into the court cases you have faced from people who are opposed to this scenario that is declared now? Are there people who are taking you to court for this declaration? And secondly, to Minister Dlamini Zuma, my question, could you give us a bite on the preparedness of the provinces, ma'am, and the smaller regions? How prepared are they as well to deal with this eventuality? Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you very much. The next colleague.
Hi, Assembly Cele from the Sunday Times. Just for Minister Patel, can you give sort of a ballpark estimate of what percentage of the economy is currently not functioning due to the lockdown? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, I thought that could we are pinned was. By the way, all of us on matters of health, we also get advised by professionals. Similarly, on the question that was asked on the president and the deputy president, they have health advisors that work with them from time to time. They will also be advised by their advisors, including, by the way, by the Minister of Health himself, if indeed there is a need to approach this matter in the manner that you are proposing it is approached. So we will leave it then to the Deputy President and to advisors and also to the President's advisors. That will include our own Minister of Health on how the President, if need be, needs to deal with the developments around this matter. Colleagues, let's then answer the questions. Who wants to start? You want to start, Babu? Aaron? Or you want to finish?
If they are not ready, I can start. At Cape Town International Airport, yesterday, there were 3 outbound flights destined for Frankfurt, Germany, Zurich, and Switzerland, and Munich in Germany. And unfortunately, there were 120 people who could not find seats on any of these flights. The German consulate was at the airport and they provided consular support to their nationals. And by the way, Germany has been very, very cooperative, working with us throughout, and like many other countries, there's no country that has acted in a manner that is not consistent with the protocols that govern us in terms of interaction on matters like this. And they are going out of the country and not coming back. And so, in terms of that, in terms of the 21 days of the lockdown, these airlines are not allowed to come back to South Africa for that particular period. So the no